At 6:14 a.m., as the Caribbean air hung heavy with humidity and the sea lay deceptively calm, three Venezuelan F-16 Fighting Falcons dropped below 2,000 feet and pushed their throttles forward. Their noses aligned toward a single gray shape on the horizon, the USS Gerald R. Ford. No radio calls, no identification squawks, no warning of any kind. Just three aging fighters screaming in at roughly 450 miles per hour toward a 100,000-ton nuclear-powered aircraft carrier. The pilots believed speed, altitude masking, and aggression would buy them shock value. They believed the Americans would be startled, perhaps even rattled. What they did not understand was that they were already being watched, tracked, and calmly assessed by the most advanced maritime defense system ever assembled. The Gerald R. Ford was not merely another ship at sea. It was the flagship of American naval power, a $13 billion expression of a philosophy refined over decades. If force must be projected across oceans, it should be done with overwhelming technological dominance. Its flight deck covered 4.5 acres. Its twin A-1B nuclear reactors generated enough electricity to power a small city for decades without refueling. Deep inside the ship, its combat systems processed torrents of data at a scale most militaries could not replicate across their entire command structure. This was not a target that reacted emotionally. It reacted systematically. The first indication of trouble appeared not to the naked eye, but on the ship's AN/SPY-6 radar at a distance of 47 nautical miles. This was no rotating antenna sweeping the horizon like something from the Cold War. SPY-6 was an active, electronically scanned array composed of dozens of radar modules working in perfect synchronization. It could track more than 1,000 targets simultaneously, produce detailed three-dimensional imagery, and distinguish a fast-moving jet from background clutter at extreme ranges. Low-altitude approaches, once a favored tactic to exploit radar shadows, were now largely obsolete. The Venezuelan pilots believed they were invisible. In reality, they had been painted almost the moment they descended. Inside the carrier's Combat Direction Center, the shift from routine to alert was immediate but controlled. Blue-lit consoles glowed softly as operators leaned forward, hands moving with practiced precision. A petty officer tagged the contacts. An officer confirmed track quality. Within seconds, the entire carrier strike group shared the same tactical picture. Three unidentified aircraft, low altitude, high speed, inbound on a direct vector. The projected timeline showed they were still 12 minutes out. On board the Ford, 12 minutes was an eternity. At 6:17 a.m., the air boss issued the order. Alert fighters were to be launched. On the flight deck, choreography replaced stillness. Yellow-shirted handlers sprinted across the non-skid surface as two FA-18E Super Hornets were guided into position. Beneath the deck, the electromagnetic aircraft launch system came alive. Unlike steam catapults, EMALs used linear induction motors to hurl aircraft forward with smoother acceleration, reduced airframe stress, and, most critically, dramatically shorter reset times. Where older systems needed minutes, EMALs needed seconds. The first Hornet locked into the catapult shuttle. Systems checked green. The pilot advanced the throttles to full afterburner. In less than 2 seconds, 270 feet of electromagnetic force flung the aircraft into the sky at roughly 170 miles per hour. 12 seconds later, the second Hornet followed. Call signs: Viper 1 and Viper 2. Their mission parameters were simple on paper: intercept, identify, and shadow. Do not engage unless fired upon. Everyone involved understood how quickly such clarity could evaporate when foreign jets charged directly at an American carrier. At 6:21 a.m., the situation escalated. Additional radar tracks emerged, climbing from Venezuelan airspace. Three more F-16s accelerated to join the first element. Six fighters now formed a loose attack wedge pointed squarely at the strike group. This was no accidental overflight. It was a deliberate, coordinated provocation. Somewhere in Caracas, a decision had been made to test American resolve. The assumption was that proximity and boldness would force a visible reaction. The Hornets climbed to 22,000 feet and turned to meet the formation. Their APG-79 ASA radars locked on at over 60 miles, presenting each pilot with a clear, stable tactical picture. 6 tracks, rapid closure, roughly 4 minutes to merge. On the destroyers USS Mason and USS Thomas Hudner, the response was equally measured. Both Arleigh Burke-class ships tightened their protective ring around the carrier. Their Spy-1D radars tracked the incoming aircraft, while electronic warfare suites remained passive, listening rather than broadcasting. Every radar pulse, every radio emission from the Venezuelan jets was being captured, categorized, and stored. Intelligence collection had begun in earnest. By 6:24 a.m., the Hornet pilots had visual contact. Sunlight flashed off canopies at 11 o'clock low. 6 F-16s in tight formation, Venezuelan Air Force markings clearly visible. Centerline fuel tanks were mounted, but the external hardpoints appeared clean. No missiles, no bombs. It was a calculated choice, allowing aggressive behavior while maintaining plausible deniability. This was a familiar pattern in modern gray zone confrontations: intimidate without firing, provoke without crossing the legal threshold of war. For the next 40 minutes, the sky above the Caribbean became a high-speed chessboard. The Venezuelan formation split and rejoined repeatedly. Individual jets made steep diving passes toward the destroyers, pulling up at the last moment in full afterburner. One rolled inverted and skimmed the surface barely hundreds of feet above the water, its exhaust disturbing the sea below. Another climbed high, circling slowly, likely attempting to collect electronic intelligence of its own. Throughout it all, the American Hornets held disciplined positions, shadowing without crowding, tracking without locking, responding without escalating. This was not hesitation, it was confidence. At 6:39 a.m., the most dangerous moment arrived. One F-16 broke formation and dove directly toward the carrier. On the Ford's deck, the Phalanx close-in weapon system slewed to track automatically. In autonomous mode, it did not wait for human commands. Radar lock established. Firing solution calculated. The 20mm Gatling gun stood ready to unleash thousands of tungsten rounds per minute if criteria were met. The jet leveled at roughly 600 feet and roared across the carrier's bow, close enough to rattle equipment and shake crew members where they stood. The system tracked flawlessly, but did not fire. The line between aggression and hostility had not yet been crossed. Moments later, the jet climbed away. The tensions slowly eased, but the lesson lingered. Modern naval standoffs are measured in seconds, margins, and restraint. At 6:51 a.m., the encounter ended as abruptly as it had begun. Without any radio transmission or visible signal, the Venezuelan formation broke away. All 6 F-16s rolled southwest, throttles advancing as they accelerated back toward home airspace. On the radar displays aboard the Gerald R. Ford and her escorts, the tracks bent away in unison, their threat vectors dissolving into harmless, outbound lines. There was no pursuit, no taunts, no final gesture from the American side. The carrier strike group simply watched as the contacts receded and then vanished beyond sensor range. The sea remained calm. The carrier never altered course or speed by so much as a fraction. $13 billion of naval power continued forward as if nothing of note had occurred. That apparent indifference was, in itself, a carefully crafted message. In naval operations, what you do not do often speaks louder than what you do. By refusing to maneuver defensively, by not launching additional fighters, by not illuminating the Venezuelan aircraft with fire control radar, the Americans signaled absolute confidence. This was not restraint born of uncertainty. It was restraint born of dominance. The strike group had the ability to escalate instantly, but chose not to, denying the provocation the dramatic reaction it sought. Below decks, however, the encounter was far from ignored. The intelligence value harvested during those 47 minutes was substantial. Every radar emission from the Venezuelan F-16s had been recorded. Communication patterns, frequencies, pulse repetition rates, and waveform characteristics were all captured in exquisite detail. Flight profiles were analyzed for training doctrine and pilot proficiency. Aggressive maneuvers revealed risk tolerance and command guidance. Even the absence of certain actions, such as radar locks or missile arming, provided insight into rules of engagement and political constraints. The Spy-6 radar had not merely tracked the jets. It had built a comprehensive electronic fingerprint of an entire Air Force detachment. From a cost perspective, the imbalance was striking. Venezuela expended tens of thousands of dollars in fuel, maintenance, and flight hours to stage the demonstration. In return, they handed over intelligence worth millions, possibly more, to an adversary capable of exploiting it for years. They also reinforced the justification for sustained American naval presence in the region, strengthening arguments in Washington that vigilance in the Caribbean remained necessary. Strategically, nothing had shifted in Venezuela's favor. No territory was gained, no patrol routes changed, no concessions were extracted. The balance of power remained exactly where it had been before the jets took off. Life aboard the Ford quickly returned to routine. Scheduled training sorties launched later that afternoon. Meals were served on time. Logs were updated, reports transmitted, and the incident folded neatly into the immense operational history. For the crew, it became another example of why procedures exist and why discipline matters. For command planners ashore, it became a valuable case study in modern gray zone confrontation. Within 48 hours, Venezuelan state media aired selectively edited footage accompanied by triumphant commentary. The narrative claimed that bold Venezuelan pilots had forced an American carrier to retreat. Domestically, the story played its role, offering a symbolic victory to audiences far removed from the reality at sea. Navigation data told a different story. The Gerald R. Ford's course plot showed a perfectly straight line throughout the entire encounter. No evasive maneuvers, no reduction in speed. The carrier had treated 6 inbound fighters with the same level of concern most people reserve for seabirds circling a picnic. This episode illustrated the true nature of contemporary military signaling. Modern confrontations rarely begin with explosions. They unfold through radar returns, electronic emissions, flight geometry, and restraint. One side probes, the other side refuses to react in the expected way. Messages are exchanged silently, measured not in words, but in capability. Venezuela sought to demonstrate relevance and resolve. What it ultimately demonstrated was the vast gap between aging fourth-generation fighters and a fully integrated carrier strike group built around fifth-generation sensors, nuclear power, and networked warfare. The Caribbean remained peaceful that morning. No weapons were fired, no lives were lost. Yet the outcome was decisive. The Venezuelan pilots returned home with empty gestures and full debriefs. The United States gained insight, reinforced deterrence, and continued its mission uninterrupted. The lesson was clear and quietly delivered. Against overwhelming capability, theatrics do not intimidate. They educate. Some lessons are taught with explosions. This one was taught with calm, data collection, and indifference. And for those who came seeking a reaction, that quiet dismissal may have cut deeper than any missile strike ever could.